The meeting to order. Good evening and welcome to the March the 22nd, 2022 council meeting for the town of Middleton. Deputy Mayor Smith and Councillor Clayton McMurtry send their regrets, otherwise all members are present. The meeting is taking place in person and live streamed on Facebook. Later. After a long 2 years, it's a pleasure once again to welcome the public to attend our meetings in person. Okay, we'll call it, the meeting is in order, and the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. However, I would ask you to move number 11 to 12 and put in number 11 in camera. Otherwise, it should be approved as presented. What are your wishes?
I approve the agenda as amended.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Contrary minded? Motion carried. The agenda approved as amended. We have a proclamation, Purple Day for Epilepsy, March the 26th, and as Mayor of Middleton, I would proclaim that March the 26th will be Purple Day for Epilepsy in the town of Middleton. Next, we have a presentation, and with us, Tidal Power Pilot Project, Mayor Amrin Boyer of Annapolis Royal, and Bill Crossman. You're on.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting us in or letting us make this presentation. So, thank you, Mayor Sylvester, because that's what I call you, is Mayor Sylvester, and members of council for being here. I'd like to introduce Bill Crossman, who many of you know, but I would like to formally introduce him as the technical manager for this project. And he's the president of Turbine Energy Incorporated, which is our partner for this pilot project, or who we would hope to have as a partner. So Bill Crossman is the sole owner of Turbine Energy Inc. and the inventor of this tidal energy technology. This is a protected product. There's intellectual property at stake. We have non-disclosure agreements signed with every member of council and every staff on this project, as well as members of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities project team assigned to the project, because it's new technology for which the company will be seeking a patent. He's previously been awarded a United States patent for waste energy recovery technology. He's a science graduate of Dalhousie University with study concentration in marine ecology. His work experience includes wind power site assessments in the Canadian Arctic, while serving as the manager of the Innovate Research Centre in the Northwest Territories. He's also led renewable energy development projects for the Western Valley Development Authority in Cornwallis, Nova Scotia, and you may know him through that. So without further ado, I'm introducing you to Bill.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Okay, I guess the starting point would be that when my wife and I moved back from the Arctic after I retired to come back home to Nova Scotia, I was really delighted to see that people were really interested in tidal energy here, and it was just starting to come on as a real contribution to fighting climate change. But it didn't take very long before I started becoming kind of disappointed and disillusioned by what was happening, and it seemed to me that the technology was just too big and too expensive and was only accessible to large corporations, mostly from Europe. And but anyway, I've been following it ever since, and it seems to me that the problem has to do with the environment, the depth of water that is necessary for the tidal technology as it exists now. So this is why I'm proposing this shallow water approach. And I think if we take a shallow water approach, it's possible to eliminate all kinds of both capital and operational expenses. So that's essentially the assessment of what we got now that's driving this project. And so I'll just like to look at the problem itself right now. So what you have here is what's called a horizontal axis turbine. So the best way to show it is it's just like a windmill that you'll see up on North Mountain, where the blades are going this way, and the axis is the shaft that runs to the generator in the body of the turbine, and so it's always turning this way. The problem with this horizontal axis turbine is that as you try to scale it up, you have to make the blades longer and bigger. And when you do that, then the tower has to get taller, the base has to get more massive, and the longer the blades, the deeper the water. So, but then you're cable to shore as well, so that drives the necessity of having long extensions of cable. So what you have, like near Parsborough at Minas Passage, where they're 2 meters offshore, or 2 kilometers offshore, and the cabling is $1 million a kilometer for the cable, and another $1 million a kilometer for the installation. And so you've got, here in the illustration, you've got barges, ships, sort of purpose-built other equipment that's very expensive, so the capital costs are really high. But then operating in deep, high current water also makes your operating costs really expensive, where you need commercial divers and other equipment. So the whole thing is just so expensive. It's sort of like a return on investment. It's how much are you putting in, how much you're getting out. And so what you'll find is that when you compare solar and wind power, which if you look at what they call the levelized cost of electricity, you can say how much does it cost per kilowatt hour. And so solar is down around 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Wind's like 7 or 8 cents a kilowatt hour, and tidal comes in at 53 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's just, and we'll see this price per kilowatt hour for tidal pop up later. But it's just so expensive that, and as we get closer and closer to the panic point with climate change, is at some point we're going to have to say, well, tidal is just hopeless, and everything will be spent on solar and wind and hydroelectric. But the good sites for hydroelectric are running out as well. So what I'm proposing in this technology is that we look at a system of getting out of deep water. And here in the Bay of Fundy, it's long been known that one of the easiest ways of operating in a tidal regime is just like the weir fishermen do. Just simply make better use of the rhythm of the tides, which gives you 2 low tides per day of about 2 hours each. And if you concentrate your activity in that time, you can eliminate all of those other deep water costs by simply walking down the beach and looking at your turbines, switching over parts or whatever you have to do. It also is much easier to install the turbine. It's much easier to decommission the turbine when the time comes. So by using the natural rhythm of the tides, you get this sort of water-free access twice a day. The other thing that happens is if anything goes wrong with your turbine while it's running, you will get access to it within 12 hours. Now, the open hydro system that Emera had put in the Bay of Fundy at Minas Passage, when it got into trouble, it was 3 years before they got it up off the bottom. I mean, you have twice-a-day access is a real advantage. The other thing you can also do is that if you have smaller equipment like rubber wheeled tractors, front-end loaders and so on, you can even just go down the beach and pick the turbine right up if you have to. Disconnect the cable and just bring it ashore. And you can switch out parts within the 2 hours that you have and so on. So the access is really important. So when it started to look serious as a project, I started to look around for some sort of, other than my own money, which is being retired is not that much. So I started looking for grants, and I came across the Nova Scotia Voucher program. And the beauty of this program is that it's for a startup company, and technology is one of the things that they favor. It pairs the company with a university or community college so that you tap into the institution's expertise. And so we chose to use Dalhousie, and in turn the professor Sue Malloy, Dr. Sue Malloy, who teaches marine engineering, a lot of ship design, but she also is quite an expert in tidal technology. So what happened was, although I had some ideas, it was always sort of under the assistance of scientific oversight. So it's not just a harebrained idea, it's an idea that's getting vetted by professionals at the university level. And so we were able to get 15,000 first round, and because we made progress in that, we were awarded a second level of another 25. And then later, there was a third level of engineering testing from the Federal Industrial Research Assistance Program, and ARROW, the Annapolis Investment Rural Opportunities, who also gave us $10,000 each. So there's about $60,000 in at this point. There are 3 engineering reports that have been written after each round of research. They're confidential, but they're available if anyone wants to dig deeper into it. They're available, you can have access to them if you'll sign a non-disclosure agreement like others have. So the turbine that we came up with, this is an early sketch of it. Essentially what it is a drive head that will turn in the water this way. So it's a vertical access turbine. And the problem with this design is that when the water strikes the blades, it's striking both sides at the same time. And the curvature allows it to sort of catch on the inside of the curve, but it also drags on this side. And so all you get is the net difference between the drag and the drive on each side. And so what I decided to do was to try to just deflect that by creating a covering on this side. And the covering has, in the illustration, it has a rudder on it. And essentially, the bearings are independent of the drive head itself. So while all the time this is spinning, this is free to move if there's any different changes in the current. And then when the tide stops and comes back in, this will switch sides. And then so now it's catching this side. So this always switches 4 times a day. So that's the...
So it works with the tide coming in and then going out?
Yes, yes. And so all of the design considerations are just in the head of the turbine. It's the number of blades, the curvature, the deflector. Everything else is off the shelf. So a concrete base is easily made available through local concrete suppliers like Rice Concrete. We can get an off-the-shelf generator. Cabling is available, and monitoring equipment. All that is just off the shelf. The innovation is in the drive head that gets you out of deep water. So this is our one of the providers, service providers, is the Nova Scotia Community College's Dartmouth campus, and they actually fabricated these drive heads. They're made of stainless steel. It was done on a metal 3D printer, basically a little computer-driven laser welder goes into a pile of stainless steel powder, and it runs all night long, and then in the morning someone comes, sticks their hand inside the pile of powder and shakes one of these things out. It's really remarkable, and the detail is just really minute. It's really beautiful. Anyway, probably when the project goes ahead, we will probably go to probably stainless steel sheet metal, because next step up is a 1 meter, about the size of the table, would be the turbines that we'd be testing. And we intend to put together 3 of them. So I'll show you a bit on that a little later. So we started testing. First testing location was at Memorial University at their tow tank at their engineering department. Essentially, the tow tank runs down a length of tank of water at a speed equivalent to what the tidal current would be. So instead of water running past a stationary turbine, you just pull the turbine through the water. That you can test in that way. So that's what we did, and we found out that yes, indeed, the deflector did make a great deal of difference in the rotational speed of the head when it was free spinning. We weren't able to hook up a generator to it, but we did that later at another test. And so the second test did give us power production figures, which are all available in these engineering reports. It was done at the Aquatron facility at Dalhousie University's Ocean Science Center. Again, Dal and their technicians are participating in the design of the test and so on. And we found there some really interesting outcomes. And one of the configurations of blades and deflector gave us a 5-fold increase in power production. And it's the results point at a number of different areas that will probably make the efficiency of the jump even higher. And we want to test that. We have about 3 different new tests to develop if the project goes ahead. So if we get a turbine that is operating at optimum production, from there, the question would be, would you just make it bigger and bigger and bigger until it just becomes so unwieldy that it's impossible? But you don't want to abandon this sort of size advantage. So what we're looking at as well is doing turbine arrays. And the illustration is something that a university graduate student at Stanford came up with. And what she was trying to demonstrate was that in wind turbines, because a turbine, when it's turning, will disrupt the air behind it, you can't put another turbine in too close. It's so disruptive. This one doesn't hardly get any power. And so what she wanted to show was that if you took wind turbines, instead of having them as horizontal turbines, made them vertical turbines, you could actually put them very close together, and the spill off from one would drive the next one down, the next one down, the next one down. And so, but she didn't want to do it in air because it was too big a project, so she put them in a flow tank and did it in water. And in fact, she sort of did our experiment for us. And she found that if you put them in staggered arrays like that, you can pack them in about 10 times tighter than you could if they were one behind the other. So it's an opportunity to sort of tighten up your test area. And so what you could do is you could line them up on the low tide mark, but then because they're staggered, they would eventually drift out of the low tide mark. But then if you change the curvature of the blades so that the turbine, instead of running clockwise when you're looking down, it'll run counterclockwise, then you could slant them all back the other way across the low tide mark again. So you could put an infinite number of them right along the low tide mark in anywhere with a good tidal flow. I should mention that sometimes a little tricky getting your head around it, but we keep thinking of tide being the level of water going up and down, and very proud about the fact that Bay of Fundy has a 30-foot tide. But wherever it's constricted, it's also being pushed through by the pressure of the incoming water. So you're getting up and down, but you're also getting flow. So two things are happening at the same time. And it's only at slack low tide that everything's slack high tide and slack low tide, everything stops. And it's at the low tide that you get your access. So to go this next round, which is really a major jump, we needed a substantial source of funding, and that brought us to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And this signature initiative that they have is really designed to do to support exactly what we're trying to do. It's got to be innovative. You've got to be able to show that if it works, it'll work in a lot of other places. It will even work in shallow rivers. Northern rivers are fairly shallow, but they have huge costs for diesel fuel to keep communities going. Well, a vertical access turbine could be put in a shallow river and still work. Winter's a problem with ice, of course, but that's another story. So anyway, we have an amount in for $335,000, and the municipalities have to come up with 10%, and the FCM will pay for 80%. And with Saluma's piece and the town's piece, all we need is one more third, and we're away. And if the pilot project is successful, then FCM has another program for capital projects, which is also fairly attractive. and with low interest rates, 5 to 10 million, and even some of it as a grant. So if it's successful, that would be our next step. Perhaps the most important part here is the province has this feed-in tidal tariff program, which will allow a tidal power producer to become part of a program that will give them 53 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity if it's put onto the grid. And the program can run for 15 years. And when we started off, and I said the cost of tidal is so terrible that it can't possibly be a technology of choice down the road. The Utilities Review Board solicited from tidal power producers some estimate of their costs, and that's where that came in. So the Utilities Review Board has this program that will actually cover all of that cost for a big operation. If a small operation like this that sets out to cut costs could still get the 53 cents a kilowatt hour, there's enough there to sustain the project for 15 years, so that each time you go through a new iteration of prototypes and so on, they get more and more efficient. So there's a rich opportunity to make this thing into an ongoing technology. I've included this just to point out that some of the other municipalities are already involved in this kind of collaboration. And of course they do wind at Eller's House. That's the wind farm you see when you're coming in from Halifax near Windsor. But anyway, the point is that the model is there, and the people involved with the communities that are the owners have indicated that they would be more than interested in helping another group get going. So it's not like you'd be inventing this. You could just take their model. And the same thing where they, it doesn't have to be on their municipal property or anything. You could go anywhere in the province as a collaborative group. And some environmental considerations. This is the tank at Dalhousie's Aquatron. Those are actually striped bass that you see swimming past underneath a frame that this prototype is there, and it just demonstrates that the fish were able to swim by freely and didn't seem to be concerned about it. But that's there needs to be, of course, far more environmental monitoring than that once the project starts. And and DFO has actually vetted this project, and they're telling us that yes, it's cleared to go ahead from their point of view, in that it would not be a hazard to endangered species.
Might as well mention the location.
The location that we have tentative agreement with the Canadian Coast Guard is their property at Victoria Beach, where the lighthouse is on Victoria Beach side. They have a water lot attached to the land that they own there, and they say that we can use their low tide area for the location for the turbines. So that all we have to do is have the funding in place, and they will issue us a permit to use their property. So that's more or less taken care of. Just a quick mention of the tidal power plant. There is a possibility of some access to a similar kind of arrangement there, but it's sort of caught up in so much political problems of late that it will be some time before that area would be available. But if there were openings in the dike, you could use this kind of a system there. And so basically that's it. Basically it's a manageable scale, and there is financial support, there's guaranteed revenue. The estimate on the revenue, I did have an item there in the slide that if you had 10 of these turbines at 50 kilowatt capacity each, in an ideal situation, you would generate, if it was perfect, you would generate $1.5 million a year. So, and the capital cost, you'd probably repay it in 4 or 5 years. It's rough. I mean, at that tidal feed-in tariff level, there's a great deal of gross revenue. So that's my spiel. Sorry it took so long. If you have questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Questions, anyone?
I just have one question more so for our decision later this evening around the investment from the municipality potential. Just to clarify whether the investment for this pilot piece, there's not expected to be any immediate return on that investment. It's more the longevity of the project.
Well, as soon as the project ties into the grid, so that's the big issue. As soon as that project produces some electricity and is tied into the grid.
Right, okay.
That's the condition. And there's three-phase power at the Casey Fish Plant. So we've been talking about that. So there is the potential, but we didn't want to pull that up because there's two big ifs. And we have applied. The town certainly made it known at the hearing with the URB that it was after the kilowatt, basically the kilowatt capacity of the tidal power plant. So when we argued that they couldn't say it was no longer useful, we said, well, you haven't considered the kilowatts that are being produced, and that has value that is useful for community projects. And the province doesn't have enough community projects. Nova Scotia Power can't point to enough of them. So so part of our useful was going after that, which was a new argument to them.
Okay. And I do have one more question. If for some reason there was not a decision to move forward with the pilot project, is there potential to come on in the capital project phase? And I assume that if that were the case, that there would be a disadvantage to that to municipalities who weren't on in the pilot phase?
So our whole project was based on partnering, because we didn't want, and that's why we approached every municipal unit within Kings and Annapolis counties. They're all approached. And Ford took it seriously, as you did. We're waiting to hear from 2 other units. Saluna then came up with a second tier of the funding, which puts us within 22,333 of hitting where it's 100% funding. So we didn't want to close the door. Obviously, the partners who come in, whoever partners with us up front, there'll be some advantage in terms of working out what's going to happen during the pilot. But never in the application did we assume that one partner would be greater than another. Those are all things we decided once we have people to talk to.
Correct, okay. I just wanted to make sure in my RFD, those would probably be 2 questions that I can't answer without you in the room.
And those were things that would be up for negotiations.
Great.
The question of the generating power in the pilot project, what can happen is as soon as we see the first certainty on the production of power, we can then apply for the program and be moving on that, even though the pilot project still might even have a year to go. So it isn't that we would have to wait. We could get approval earlier on. but it would probably, at the beginning, it would be just 3 turbines if they were all operating properly. But in the capital project, it might be 10 or 20.
I just want to thank you for thinking about all the other municipalities who don't readily think about Tidal as an option for where they're located. So thank you for the opportunity to consider this.
Thank you for having us. Really appreciate it.
Are there any further questions or comments?
Ultimately, you know, if you could look at pie in the sky, how many partners are you looking at having in total? Like, is there a limit to the partners?
We didn't get that far because the record of partnership in our county, we know is, you know, it's been difficult.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing our best to try to work with Middleton, with Kings, and that's paying off. So the interesting thing is, although we couldn't get the county interested in this larger project, they are participating in our climate change project, as is Middleton, which is great because they're sending their first rep to our environmental committee. So we have this big opportunity here. So we can't ignore the county when it comes to climate change. You know, we know that we need partners because it's the same patch. Whatever we do in Annapolis Royal is going to affect all of us. So increasingly, when it comes to climate change and energy projects and emissions, the answer is regional. So once we get a few heads at the table, we can discuss how that looks like, but we said we wouldn't go alone. We said it from day one that these projects are too big for us to go alone. So we managed to get the $335,000 project in front of FCM. This is our 3rd application. We went through a pre-application, we went through a full-blown application, then they changed the process. We had to reapply with the new form. So it was a lot of red tape, and we've been at this for 12 months, and we got it this far.
I think you've done remarkably well, and I'm very intrigued about it. And I've said for municipalities, you know, that have their own electrical utility, in those situations, they are in more of a better financial position than other municipal units. So I'm completely intrigued. I do like the return on the investment. I like the period of, you know, 4 or 5 years. It's not like 25 years so there is absolutely, there's certain potential. There's great potential there. I was just wondering if there's a limit to partners, because the more partners you have, of course, everybody wants a bigger piece. So it depends on the size of the project. So just from a business point of view, I was just curious on if there was a limit, but that's good.
Well, we need at least one municipal partner to talk to on that.
Yes. Well, that's interesting.
The good part is we have the software. Unbeknownst to me, we can run an electrical utility. And Don Reagan said to me, I said, well, how hard is that to do? And he said, okay, he said, you're making too much of this. He said, it's just like a water utility, except electricity is more dangerous.
Yeah, very much so. But very intriguing. Thank you.
Okay.
There's also a trend toward distributed generation of renewable energy, and it's one big power plant stuck in one end of the province isn't what the future is going to hold. And that distribution will be a lot of smaller utilities, sort of like going back to the way it used to be when all the municipalities had their own power companies. And so this is an opportunity to share in that, so you will need lots of partners in a way.
Okay.
I've got a question. The Annapolis River is partially tidal up to probably Bridgetown at the outside. And the Annapolis River does have ice in it. Is it possible to bring this technology, to put this technology into the river, or is it strictly salt water, non-icing water?
No, it can be used in fresh water. That's not an issue.
Okay.
The other issues are that you don't have access to it on a twice-a-day basis if it's in the river.
That's right.
And then ice is more of a consideration, perhaps not so much here. Yeah, the Annapolis River, if the tide was allowed to flow freely again, then it is a decent site for it. Right at Annapolis Royal would be a good spot.
I was thinking of the power transmission costs, you know, between the installation site and Middleton, for example.
Yes. Well, see, yeah, and the infrastructure is all there. The substation is there and all the distribution network and all that is there. In fact, I filed an intervention with the review board when this whole question of the power plant came up, saying that we would like the board to consider insisting that the allocation on the grid be held for Tidal, for the development of Tidal. Because half the problem around here when they try to put renewable energy generation in place is the grid isn't up to taking it, you know. Like a lot of the sites down on Bigby Neck for Tidal can't get access to the grid because the grid isn't powerful enough to handle it. So what is assigned to the power plant at Annapolis Royal should be held for development of Tidal in this area. We haven't heard an answer.
Well, that's a very good point. I never really thought about that before. It's one thing to generate the power, but you gotta have to be able to distribute it. So down on Digby Neck, you know, along where I, yes, exactly, yeah, I never really thought about that. Interesting.
Okay. Okay, well, thanks again.
Thank you for having us.
And you won't disrupt anything by getting a coat.
Thank you.
You would ask her.
Fine.
Feel free.
It's remoing next
Thank
Monday.
you, Mayor.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll see you next Monday.
Is it really an all-day meeting?
I don't think so.
No, no, I think that was a
I
mistake.
looked at the message, it said all day.
I won't be there.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Okay, thank you.
Remote advisory.
I thought I would check. Now, which code is yours, Bill? Because I don't want to offend somebody.
Actually,
No,
that's
it's
mine.
not.
That's yours, okay.
Mine's code.
That's, is that a Columbia or?
It is, but you feel like a baked potato inside.
Well, that's the idea, isn't it?
That's right. That's right.
Your code, sir? There you go.
Okay, then, item 5.1, minutes of the meeting of February the 22nd. What are your wishes?
I'll move the minutes of the regular council meeting of February 22nd, 2022 be approved as circulated.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary-minded? Motion carried. The in-camera meeting of February 22nd.
I move that the minutes of the in-camera meeting of February 22, 2022 be approved as circulated.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on that motion.
Just for
Yes.
point of clarity, I don't think John.
Oh, I can't second, I wasn't here.
Because you weren't
Sorry.
here.
I read them though.
I know that we
Yeah,
don't
you're right. Yeah.
record
Yeah.
who said what, but it might be appropriate for someone else to second that.
Okay, Gary, you seconded it, didn't you?
I second it.
Thank you.
All those in
Thank you.
favor?
Good night.
Aye.
Contrary-minded? Motion carried. The next item, anything by citizens. Do we have anything for tonight?
There was nothing received. We thought there might be some public attendance, but we will move on to the next.
Okay, item 7.1, committee of the whole recommendations, the RFD 005-2022, the Remo Mutual Aid Agreement between Annapolis and Kings County.
I'll move on recommendation of the Regional Emergency Management Advisory Committee that council approve the current Annapolis County and Kings County Mutual Aid Agreement as circulated.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on that motion. Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary-minded? Motion carried. Next then, 7.2, draft operating budget 2022-23, version 3. This is where
Would you like Lisa to say a few things first and then?
well, whatever. Lisa?
Okay, thank you. So version 1 of Middleton's operating budget was presented for council's consideration on February 7th, followed by a virtual public budget information session on the 10th of February. After that, we had version 2 of the operating budget presented to council on February 21st. Based on requests from council at that time, staff prepared tax rate scenarios and presented those to council on March 7th. And the third version of the operating budget, which is being presented tonight, has included a couple options and also the opportunity for additional option to deliberate regarding the tax rate increase and use of operating surplus. There have been a couple changes since version 2, so those changes have been summarized here in a table. Notable changes, we've seen an increase in the contribution for our recreation grant from Annapolis County, as well as the grant for our fire services from Annapolis County has also increased approximately $3,000. We have seen the potential to decrease revenue with the loss of a potential grant for a student by $6,000. And we have seen a more accurate representation of the increase to our RCMP costs that we can expect over the next fiscal year. So rather than the $153,000, we believe it'll be closer to $136,000. So that's approximately $17,000 less than we had initially anticipated. We've also included the 10% decrease to council's remuneration per the direction from our last meeting. And we've also received notice from Property Evaluation Services that we may expect their bill to decrease next year by approximately $400 over this year, which was previously anticipated to be an increase.
Okay, having seen those and having gone through the package and having received a number of comments and so on, first of all, I would like to say that my feeling right now is that tonight we cannot look at more than a 1 to 2 cent increase in the tax rate as a maximum. The people are saying that because of the increase in property assessments, which is quite above the cost of living, and then to add on top of that again a tax rate increase when other municipalities in the area have seen their assessments go up and the tax rates have gone down. That puts us in a position where the public are not the least bit receptive to that. So those are my feelings personally as your mayor, and I would ask that you seriously consider something of that nature, and we'd leave it up to the financial people to work out how we get there.
Sir, I'd 100% agree with you, and I did a little bit of looking today, and you remember where I've looked at, but so just it's viewpoint. The difference between 2021 tax rates for houses that sold to the reassessed value of 2022 go to extremes. I've got 7 properties that sold last year here. 29%, 12%, 11%, 12%. 148.9% increase in taxes, a 282.2% increase in taxes. Every house that I looked at was in the double-digit increase in assessed value and taxes. On top of everything else that our public, the residents are dealing with, increases in the price of fuel, increases in the price of food, increases in the price of everything, maintenance for their house, everything. A 7% increase in taxes on top of that is, to me, is just unattainable for most people. And as my discussion last week, it doesn't promote growth. When the average assessment, I think we said last week, was 141,000, I would dare say, and this is just a guess, I certainly haven't looked it up, but to build a home and put it on any property around here right now, even the most modest home, is going to be a $300,000 house. If you look at the assessed values of housing, the ones that have sold, or one that it's up right now, and I believe the current owner of it is selling because they can't afford the taxes and they only just bought the house recently. You know, at $250,000, just off the top of my head, she's looking at paying $5,300 a year. You know, so a $300,000 home or a $325,000 home to build and assess that is going to cost someone $500 a month in taxes. I don't think raising tax rates are the way to generate or the desire for people to move into Middleton should that need present itself, or should that opportunity start to present itself. So I, for one, am in all agreement with you.
Gary, you look as if you're going to say something.
Well, I have had a number of people reach out to me after our last council meeting. And in particular, some are single parent families. And they find it difficult to, we highlighted the 7 cents and finding that to be a struggle. So interesting enough that in past years, council would have, you know, and coincidentally tonight, our live streaming capability is not there. But I'd said to several people before, I said our conversation around our last council meeting has generated conversation in the community because people are made aware of the conversation and the potential to increase taxes. Whereas in the past, it was always, no one really attended council meetings, and once it was passed, you found out about it pretty well after the fact. So it has generated a fair amount of conversation in the community, being a fella right on Main Street. So, yes, it is hard to fathom expenses versus revenue. And interesting enough, I was intrigued by the presentation here tonight about other ways of generating revenue. And I don't know if we can, based on taxes, balance the budget this year, from what I'm hearing from everybody out there, based on what you just said about raising taxes to the point we have to balance the budget. I don't think we can do that in a year. So I guess, yes, 2 cents doesn't seem to be a lot, but based on the, I'll say, constructive feedback that I've received, that seems to be on par with the people I've spoken to, especially folks that are having trouble making the ends meet, people that have their children in programs, food program, breakfast programs. Yeah, so that's really the only, I guess that's my constructive contribution to the conversation, I guess.
Your Worship, I have a couple of points I'd like to make. First, Councillor Bartlett referred to a 7% increase. It's not a 7% increase, it's a 7 cents on a $100 assessment increase, which works out to less, well, probably 4%. But if you look at the chart in front of us, the difference between an increase of 2 cents in the tax rate compared to 7 cents in the tax rate amounts to, if I read that chart correctly, $70 a year. Which is, I say not a lot of money. There are probably people in town that would, yes, that would adversely affect. But, and thirdly, if we continue on this road of not implementing the tax increases or considering the tax rate increases that are required to not have to dig into reserve every year, and our reserves are, you know, a few $100,000, we're going to be in the same boat next year, and we're going to have to dig into reserves, and we're going to be in the same boat probably the year after that. And I know we can't forecast the future, but I honestly think, with all due respect to every taxpayer in town and everyone that is renting from a taxpayer in town, that 2 cents, a 2 cent increase on the tax rate is just, we're selling ourselves short, and we're not doing the fiscally responsible thing.
So these tables are based on what? The average assessed rate of $141,000.
Yes.
The ones I just listed off were not $141,000 tax rates, and they were properties that have sold. So while I appreciate what Councillor Farron's saying, it is, you know, it's the average assessed. The person that has been reassessed or has decided to do work to their property to the penalty of, you know, having their assessed tax rate go up by 282%, or, you know, someone that's bought a piece of property and has had their assessed tax rate go up at that. Those are, you know, those are extreme numbers, and it's, you know, the average, the 141,000. You know, sure, they may not see much of a difference between, you know, a 2% and a 7% rate, but the others that aren't in that assessed rate are going to feel the pain.
There's another thing that hasn't been mentioned here, and as I guess most of you are aware, that I currently have my house up for sale, and I was looking at my tax bill and realizing that whoever buys it, the cap is gone.
And that's sir.
There is a substantial increase there for whomever that person might be, and because a number of comments that I've received from other people, because that one hadn't even entered my mind, was that, but I bought this house and I was told by the realtor that this was going to be this was the tax bill, because that's usually in there, because I know it's one thing that I was asked when I listed my house, what was your tax bill? But once they then calculate the tax bill on the uncapped amount, let alone an increase of that amount, the increase is substantial.
And you've used a real example of the point I guess I maybe didn't make as clear enough. That's exactly where these numbers are coming from. Mm-hmm. They're coming from, I believe it was mentioned during the last meeting that there was 36 houses sold. Mm-hmm. And I'll guarantee, well, I won't guarantee, but I'll pretty well guarantee that most of those were maybe in that $141,000 capped assessed rate. And when they sold for a higher price, so that cap was gone. Mm-hmm. And they're, you know, so it's not just about, yes, we have to be fiscally responsible. I certainly do believe that. We also have to be aware that we're going to tax ourselves right out of anyone wanting to move here. Again, there's a house down the road that was bought after it was renovated, and their taxes went up 148.9%, and she's now selling with less than a year into it because she can't afford the taxes, or they can't afford the taxes. I keep saying she, I don't know if it's a she or he, but they can't afford the taxes. And at the rate of $500 a month, $6,000 a year for a 3-bedroom home. It's a lot of money.
What did they pay for the home?
Well, I guess the house was here, it was the renovation, then the selling, and then the reassess the value of it.
Aside from the tax rate, is there anything in the operating budget that can be fine-tuned? So my question there is, I thoroughly look at the worksheets, and I have questions when I look at the worksheets. You know, and bear with me, Lisa, but the Diamond software, you know, we spend $24,000 a year, at least that's what it kind of added up to me, you know, on accounting software. I mean, are there things in the budget that, you know, can offset a few cents that can be trimmed from what's presented? I guess is my question. So yes, the tax rate's one thing, but the actual, how we get to the operating budget, is there some more scaling down we can do? And I'm just using that as an example. When I go through the worksheets, I just picked up on, you know, that, and I thought, and I know that's what we use, and that's what we have to have. That's just, you know, that's one thing that kind of stood out for me, you know. And so is there some more thinning of the operating budget that departments can do, like 5% of their operating budget?
Just to, maybe I'll just take that question.
So
Lisa.
not directed at you, I'm just saying, we're trying to make this all work here.
Yeah.
And I had one lady tell, sorry, Jen, you go ahead.
So I would say that we've looked through to the point where we can make changes for this budget. There are definitely things over the next year that we can look at, but we can't change our finance system like that and cut money from the, and I know you're using it as an example, but there are some things we talked about overtime today and level of service. So, you know, in Kingston, their public works does not start earlier than 2 hours before regular business days, working hours, to plow their streets, to cut down on overtime costs. So there's things like that that we can explore next year, but we're not going to make that change in tonight's approval of the budget. But if you're thinking of the future, there are definitely some areas. We're not going to eliminate that deficit in a year, but there are some areas absolutely that we can look closer at over the next year that should also require public engagement. So on level of service, those types of things that we can definitely look at. And staff has already started to make a list of some of those things like the overtime to look at. So yes, to your point.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask a question. The average, I should know this, but the average assessment, does that come from our tax roll? Is that how they highlighted or where? Yes.
It does. And that 141,800, I think, is the average. That does include the cap amount from last year. So that's been adjusted to reflect current market value as well for those that are still capped.
Your Worship, you mentioned about being made aware, or potential buyers being made aware of the tax bill for a property they buy in town. And this is kind of perhaps outside the parameters of this discussion, but are realtors not required to advise potential buyers that a cap is removed from the property and that their tax bill will be such and such?
I don't know if half of them are even aware that that exists.
Really?
Yeah, that one I don't know. I can't answer that other than
Having bought a property recently, what I get presented with is all the stats on the house as it currently is, right? So, you know, what the current fuel bill is, for example, what the current power bill is, what the current tax rate is.
Right, so if someone's an energy saver, then they have a low energy bill, and then you have someone who likes it very warm, and their
Difference, you know,
energy
a one person to a three person into a house, right? So, and the same thing is for taxes as well. Now,
It's unfortunate, Councillor Farren, but that is something that we've struggled with and identified over many years, is that that information is not shared in a way that is extremely transparent to someone. So they are caught off guard when they buy a house and their taxes jump significantly, or they don't understand that it's based on fair market value. They think that there's, it will only increase a little bit after they buy it. So there are some communication pieces that are missing from the process.
and in that case, it's not only a communication, well, to me, it should also be your bank telling you that, to be honest, because they're the ones who are gonna, most times, or a lot of times, I guess, your taxes are part of your mortgage payment. So, yeah, banks know well enough too, that they just don't, that information doesn't get out enough. And, if you're experienced in buying and selling properties, then yes, you'll know. But if you're an inexperienced buyer, or, if you're a buyer that, I guess cap for me has only really been a thing down here, but you just don't know. And again, it's not public knowledge. I mean, those are one of those things when you're buying a house that, oh great, look, the tax rate is, I'm only paying $300 a year in taxes because the house has been capped for 20, and the assessed value continues to go down, or it did for a lot of years.
I had a lady tell me today that the town doesn't care about me and my family. I said, well, sure we do. No, we don't, Gary. Well, I can sell my house, my family and I move, so another family will buy the house, move in, the town gets its taxes. So I said, well, I don't quite look at it quite like that. But she said, yeah, so she said, the town doesn't care about me. And I said, well, sure we do. But when she said that, if I sell my house and I move, someone else will buy the house, the town will still get its taxes. So,
well, according to this conversation, they're going to get more taxes.
They're going to get more.
That's, yeah. So these are the conversations that I'm having with people in the community, and I try to be, believe it or not, I try to be somewhat of a compassionate person based on what I do. But when people come to me, and that was just today, I'm thinking, well, no, we have the town. But here I am thinking, well, you know what? Probably in the big scheme of things, probably you're right. But anyway, I was trying to be a little more compassionate. But anyway, that was just brought to me today, and it just kind of resonated with me.
If I could add something, when I worked in Annapolis Royal, we had big issues with the realtors and zoning and heritage properties, and we ended up cleaning up a lot. And what we did is we did a lot of education with the realtors around what's a heritage property and what the ramifications are, as well as zoning. Like, don't try and sell someone a place to do a home business, half the place, when that's not going to work. And it took a while, but it did end up working well, and we actually made a lot more calls from realtors saying this is what they're thinking of doing, can they do that? So a lot of it's an education piece. Because I don't understand the cap either.
No, I certainly don't.
Okay, so where are we?
Well, you brought forth the 1 to 2%. Does there not need to be a motion for that?
Okay, I had said that those are, for my feelings, 1 or 2 cents would be a maximum.
Well, so I'm ready to make a motion that we don't raise the tax rate this year.
Make a motion that we,
Hold it to where it's at right now.
there be no change in the tax rate?
Yes, sir. Let's make the motion and have the discussion.
Do we have a seconder? Do we have a seconder? Sir, no?
I'll second that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then if there's no change, then that would mean that from the, what is it?
Prior year surplus.
From the prior year surplus, help me with these.
240,000. And then, so based on our projections, and I should probably let Lisa say this, about 20 would go into the operating reserve at the end of the year, and there would be a balance of about 318,000.
In the operating reserve, in the 318 to be the balance,
In the reserves.
the reserve.
That would be the total reserves, though.
Total operating
Yes.
reserve.
How much was that, sorry?
318,251.
Discussion?
Let's hear it.
As long as we are making a conscientious effort of looking at things next year, and Jen, as you had mentioned too, you know, I've tried to do a little homework myself, and I know, for example, out in the county, you know, in Bridgetown, for example, like the public works guys, and I know, and these are hard decisions, and I know the guys in Middleton, for example, they look forward to the overtime, or because that's where they make up their extra, and I understand that. And I too, one time was unionized and enjoyed overtime as well. But I know, like in Bridgetown, for example, I think the staff will come in, say, at 4 a.m. and start clearing the streets. And if it's on a weekend, I think they come in, but it's not like suddenly when the snowflakes, you know, there's an inch of snow on the ground, they might necessarily be out. So, and I don't know how well that's being received by the community, but I know there are things, you know, and changing, not to change work schedules, and I'm just using public works as an example. There's other things, but I'm just saying, instead of having your regular work day, as you already kind of alluded to, and then we've got, you know, we're in from midnight to 3 a.m., maybe the staff can stagger their start times.
All of those things have been brought up actually recently as we've gone through payroll and noticed the amounts. I will say, yes, it might not be a popular piece among staff. We did recently do a compensation review though, and base salaries are fairly competitive, though it does, planning wise, it probably would make an impact on someone's annual take home with those overtime on top of it. But I think the important piece is the public engagement. So if we went through the engagement and the public said, we can't live with that, then when you come to this time next year and you're looking at the rate increases, you've heard that you don't want to see a change in level of service, and you can balance that with your decision. But I think those are two key pieces. It's what do we have the opportunity to control, and then the education and engagement with the citizens on, can you live with this as a way to keep I don't like to say taxes, but taxes at a more even playing field.
And you're gonna see this year, we had a lot more snow than we've had in the last 3 years. So just in winter alone, your snow removal and stuff like that is more this year than what it was in 2021 and 2020.
But we could have more again next year.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Correct.
But if we...
It's a philosophy, though, that we need to determine what the philosophy is and then implement that.
That just helps our surplus at the end of the year through our operating budget. If we don't have to use as much, we have a bit more in the, well, instead of having 200 and, would you say 20,000 will now go into operating, if this passes?
So-
20,000 will go into our reserves?
And just so if someone's listening, we're using this as, you're right, as an example,
As an
but there
example.
are other areas
Very
that
much so.
we can look at. It's just one that's become
More
more
aware.
obvious in the last 3 months because of all of the storms that we've had,
Right.
that it's one that we have identified, but there are others that we can look at as well, and should look at too.
What was refresh my memory, what was our surplus this year, if there was one? I'm digging deep. I can't remember.
Projected was 260.
You mean
Oh, for this-
the current,
sorry,
the one
for
that's
this
just,
fiscal year or
This
last year?
this current year,
Last year.
or what's it projected to be?
So we're projecting this year's surplus to be around 250, 260. I'm just gonna pull out.
And that's not included in these figures.
It is, yes. Yes, it is.
So with no,
That's 75% of the if the tax rate is not changed, that's 75% of the current operating reserve.
So I think I did a rough calculation, and if our operating balance is, I haven't run this by Lisa, so she can correct my numbers, we would be, if the threshold is 10%, this would be around a 7, is where we would be for what we need to have in the operating reserve. So our FCI would be 7, which would be in the red.
so what would you need to have 10% reserve as far as?
450 or $450,000.
Yeah.
We do have, although you might not believe it, but our combined operating, or combined reserve FCI is higher because we do have, because of the money we put aside for the sewer, we do have significant capital, although it's a bit restricted, we do have significant capital.
But you can't transfer capital reserve to operating.
No, you can't, but the gas tax is one that can be used for both as long as it meets the requirements. Though we are in the process of building that back up.
Yeah.
But it is a steady contribution each year.
We've had surprises in the past couple of years. Two I can think of is the shall I say, bomb that was thrown at us with the RCMP retroactive pay and also the Nova Scotia housing bill, which we did not expect. What happens if we get something of that nature again this year and we're anchored at a 0-cent increase? There's nowhere to go.
Can you push back a little?
I'm not going to say that we're not going to see something. The RCMP, we have received what the increase over last year will be, which is 11%, and that's been adjusted in here. It does not include the retro. We have a meeting tomorrow, Lisa and I, with the rest of the municipalities that are part of the provincial partnership service agreement to understand what the ongoing will look like. So we should have a better understanding of the retro and ongoing increases to the collective agreement and costs to municipalities after tomorrow. So whether there will be another bomb or not. For housing, we do now understand that we have made the adjustments within our budget to reflect going forward and believe that we have more control over having some initial talks on capital work, but the operating loss that we see, we're kind of at that for the next couple of years. We're sort of at that, not sweet spot, but we shouldn't see much spikes in that one. But to your point, it doesn't address anything else that might come up.
And I guess my question is, and coming from where I come from, someone arbitrarily comes out and says, we're just going to suddenly increase this by $40,000. Is there any pushback as a municipal unit that we can push back and say, well, that's not going to fly? Or you just have to take this on the chin and swallow it and enjoy it?
It really depends on the service. So there's requirements under the Municipal Government Act that the province gives notice when changes are going to be made. However, these are agreements that have the flexibility built into them. They're funding formulas, so they don't require the 12 months notice that others do when they're giving changes to those numbers. So some municipalities have not paid bills, but that will catch up with them. I'm not sure if it's really caught up with them today as I talk, but there are some that have refused to pay housing bills based on the significant increase that they have been given.
And again, I just use that as an example, but that came out of nowhere.
So I do think that, I will share that both the housing bill and the RCMP are definitely on the radar of the Association of Municipal Administrators, the admin side, as well as FCM and the elected side, maybe not the housing one so much, but the RCMP one. So I see these as two issues that those boards are trying to figure out how to tackle as voices to the province. So there are, through NSFM, that would be the way to push back, hoping that it's not just one municipality that is having the issue. Our key moving forward is to identify new revenue sources and new development in town, and then to look at our level of service. As I've appreciated, and I think staff has to hear, that council does feel that we are at our bare minimum. There's not much more in terms of staffing that you can do to find savings. There are some levels of service things we can look at, but it really will come down to, over the next few years, is identifying new sources of revenue or attracting new development in order to increase our revenues, because I don't think you're going to see significant decreases unless you make significant level of service decisions on your expense side.
Your Worship, I know this is perhaps a rhetorical question because staff and management don't have any say in setting the tax rate, but I'll ask Jennifer and Lisa if what increase in the tax rate would make, aside from being high enough to, cover everything and have no problems or at all, what would be a palatable rate increase that would strike a balance that would be good for the citizens, for council, and for management staff?
I won't get Lisa to answer that question because I do think it is more of a political one. I think that we've provided some information, and there's sort of three options, I believe. There's the 7 cents, which was direction from council. The 4.5 cents, which looks at taking into account the savings we've seen since last draft, but keeping where your level of comfort seemed to be on drawing from reserves, and reducing that to the tax rate. And then the other one would be sort of no change, but I feel that this is everything has consequences, and I think we've highlighted the pros and cons of each of those decisions, and I think it's now council's decision to make on moving forward. I know that's a bit of a cop-out, but I do feel hard to make the recommendation, not being a taxpayer in the town. I do believe that this was a hard year to have this discussion because of the impact on assessments. If this was last year and we had, a 0.3% increase in assessments, talking about an increase to the tax rate is a lot more palatable, as the word that you use, for residents when you have seen assessments on average increase 5.8% over last year, and that's only if you were capped. You know, there might have been a few that didn't reach that, that amount, but it does make it a tougher decision to.
But if the,
And it's our job to make that decision, not Lisa's and not Jen's.
I'm looking for insight, not a decision. But if the assessments had only gone to here rather than to here, then the tax rate increases are going to have to do the same thing rather than going to here. They're going to have to go to here because it's the sum of the two,
Yeah, the money to operate the town is still the same, whether you
Right.
get it out of an increased assessment or
exactly.
taxes.
You've still got to get it.
Yeah.
And I fully agree, but I still, I'll still hold to my motion about making discussion.
I would just like to see, with this, as you said, public engagement, but I'd like to see us, whatever the decision is, we move and pass it, we move on, but to revisit this in a year's time, not to, whether we're having the same conversation, but have a little more insight and feedback, from those that are paying. Yeah, the whole past year has been exceptional, and
But Gary, if you liken the operation of a town, any municipality, to a business, and I know you can't quite equate it, you can't run a business based on what the people want you to do. You've got to run a business based on fiscal, and sometimes difficult fiscal decisions, to have more money coming in, than going out. And that's the situation we're faced with.
And absolutely, cash is king, and
I'll play the other side of that, because you're right, you have to, adjust things, but in business as well, we also look at our operations and how to cut things. So when I'm looking at, do I think anybody wants to buy a hamburger for $25? Absolutely not. Do I have to look at the amount of time, how I'm doing business, how I'm making that hamburger to cut down on the overall cost? Absolutely. So there's several ways of looking at the same.
is a glass half empty or is it half full?
Yeah.
There is a motion on the floor for the 0
Yeah, and this is-
cents.
yeah.
I am not a taxpayer. I am a renter. And my feelings are we need to put something there at not a 0%. I think we need to have something there, whether it be 1 or 2 cents. But I think the 0 cents is not the way to go this year. We need to have a small increase. That's my 2 cents.
No pun intended.
No pun intended.
No pun intended.
Not showing your hand or anything.
But there is a motion on the floor.
Could I just
Yeah,
make
go
one
ahead.
more
Sure,
comment
yep.
to the question from Councillor Fair? I do think, and when I look back to the first presentation we gave to council in February, we recognized that this was going to be a hard budget and a hard year, and it's not going to get easier year after year. So, and when I first came to Middleton, we talked about the notion that we do need to build up our reserves and not just carry our surpluses forward year after year. I do feel that this has been unique, so I don't want to sound like a hypocrite, but I do think that we need to, that there may be appropriate this year to look at using more of our operating reserves, not just on one-off projects, but to help balance the budget as we figure out over the next year to 2 years on how we are fully going to address the challenges that we're facing. and it's very unfortunate we're in this position, but I do think that we have to find that balance on probably drawing more than we would like to, and recognizing how we move forward to refill them in the future. So I think that this will be, although it's not the direction I would have given my first year here, I think that dipping into the reserves this year is necessary for the town to move forward.
And it's a given that we're dipping into the reserves, but the question is, how deep are we digging?
Right.
Thank you for all your insight, Jen. It's very much
I would just say
appreciated.
we're not really digging yet because prior year surplus hasn't been put in the reserves.
Right.
I guess I'm
I thought
mincing words a bit.
I thought you said that had included.
It did. It includes, maybe I'll let Lisa explain.
Sure. So that includes the estimate of what we're assuming we'll be able to transfer at the end of this fiscal year. So if something catastrophic happened and we had nothing, then that would short by approximately $250, $260. And last year there was a surplus. I just have the information here. It was $222,000 that was transferred into it at the end of last fiscal year.
And I believe we only used 37 or 57 from reserves last year.
We had a lot in this
Or this
year.
this current budget.
Through this current year, we had budgeted to use $32,700 for the one-off projects, but then we did have a couple oddities, I guess, over the course of the year, which has drawn it down as well.
Okay, so where are we now? Are you ready for the question? Are you ready for the question?
I'm still trying, so, sorry, I'm trying to figure something out here. So, if let's just say we went with zero, we're gonna have a shortfall of $240,117. Our operating reserves will still be at $318,000?
Yes.
Okay. That just means we get to transfer less into our operating reserves.
That
I think-
318 includes the 10 or so that we're projecting.
Yes, so, yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that the $240,000, and again, I'm just saying it's zero, that we have a budget shortfall.
Yes.
Our operating reserves would still be $318,000. We're not taking $240,000 out of our operating
Off of
reserve. No, okay,
That would be the anticipated balance.
okay.
So if we use 240, we think we're gonna have.
All these reserves and budgets, I was a little confused.
Yep, it's
That's
a lot of
But we
numbers.
are taking 40 to 45% of our surplus to fund operations for this year.
Which we thought it was 75% here a little while ago. Because I was a little misled too of how.
I seen your confusion, that's why I asked the question.
Well, I'm just a little misled, because to me, it looks like the reserve is 318, we're gonna take 240 out, but there's not gonna be anything left.
Right.
No, so if you chose to have the 0 cent increase, so using 240,000, you'd essentially be using up 43% of your current surplus
Yes,
that we're
pretty good.
anticipating.
That wasn't bad counseling.
Yeah. For somebody.
That's better than,
well,
yes, that's better than 75, yes.
And left in the reserves would be 318,251.
Yes, that's correct.
So what happens next year, just to play the devil's advocate, what happens next year if we're in the same boat and all of a sudden we have to take another 240,000 from that 318? We're left with,
A lot less.
yeah.
I can remember the year that I hate to look over there and think, but I can remember the year that I came in and inherited that there had been a $314,000 deficit from the previous year, and we had to get permission, special permission from the province to put half of it in this year, half of it in next year. So it has happened, and it can happen. And it might happen again. But it has here, if you look back, I forget just what year, right around 97 or something, as I'm looking at those pictures over there, but anyway. It has happened and it can happen. But that is what happened that particular year. There was a deficit of I think it was 314,000. And so then the province said, Municipal Affairs said, half of it in this year's, half of it in next year's tax rate. And I got a great big write-up in the Chronicle Herald opinion page that I think I had probably cut out somewhere in my house that I will garbage one of these days fast. But anyway, it has happened. I know only too well. I was sitting there. This chair was over there then, that's about the only difference. Okay. So where are we now? Have we had a call for the question?
Someone at some point will have to read the
Pardon?
resolution.
Okay, well, John made a motion, did he not?
John made a
He did.
motion to.
And Gary seconded.
I did second it.
Yeah.
So we do have that motion. So if you want something other than Cyril, then you have to amend that motion.
That's right.
Or
Well-
nay the motion.
Or defeat the motion.
Or defeat
Or
the
defeat
motion.
the motion, that's right.
Well, you really, if you,
Can the, sorry, so the, that's all right.
yeah, the motion can be defeated, but I mean, it can be amended.
Okay.
That's why there is an amending process.
If he wants to amend it.
I don't want to amend it, I want to see.
But he doesn't have to be the one to amend it.
Oh, really?
No.
I thought I had to be, sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, anyone can
anyone
put an
can.
Okay.
amendment forward.
I will put an amendment forward. My amendment would be to increase the tax increase at a 2-cent increase.
Do we have a seconder for the amendment? Do we have a seconder for the amendment?
Can the seconder on the original
Yes.
motion
Yes.
second the amendment?
Yes.
I will second the amendment.
Okay. So the motion before us now is to amend that first motion from 0 to 2 cents. Discussion on that. Hearing none, all those in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, the amendment is carried, so then we are now then dealing with a motion as amended. So the motion as amended would be that it would be 2 cents.
We don't, that wasn't a majority, because there are 2 councillors missing.
Yeah, but
There's four,
It's whoever's.
it's whoever's present.
yes. So you have to have a quorum, Mike.
When you have a quorum, and we have a quorum.
If we're missing another
We had
councillor.
a majority voting. So the motion before us now then is do we approve of the motion as amended?
Oh, I thought that's what we did.
There was just 2
No, we
amendments.
amended the motion,
Oh, I see, okay, I understand. Sorry, Your Honor, it's just,
but do we then wish to approve of the motion amended, as amended? The reason for that is because someone else could bring in an amendment to the amendment and it can keep going. So that's why you have to first pass the amendment and then go back to see, do you agree with then the original motion as amended? If so, it's passed. If not, then is there a further amendment to what we've just debated?
He teaches the course.
Yeah, I can tell.
Pardon?
You teach the course.
I've been around here 50 years. Yes, that is how it goes.
What, you share back over there?
No.
Let's check.
Anyway, are we ready for the question on the motion as amended, which means then the increase in the tax rate would to be 2 cents?
But that motion can still be amended?
Oh, yeah.
At this moment.
Yeah, it can be amended as long as there's somebody moving to amend it and someone seconds, and it can keep going.
I would like to amend that motion to be an increase of 7 cents on $100 of assessment, residential and commercial.
Do we have a seconder? Do we have a seconder? Third and last call. Do we have a seconder? Amendment lost for want of a seconder. So we are back then to the motion as amended, 2 cents. Are you ready for the question on that motion?
Can I make another amendment?
Well, I mean, as long as, I guess we can stay, we don't want to stay here all night, but
Yes.
anyway, yes. There are any number of amendments can be made as long as you can get a seconder and a majority vote.
I'll amend that motion then to read an increase of 5 cents on both the commercial and the residential tax rate.
Do we have a seconder for the amendment? Do we have a seconder? Third and last call. Do we have a seconder? Lost for want of a seconder. Are you ready then for the question on the motion
Okay.
that is before us? Hold on, the question called for?
Before you ask the question, I just want to clarify for the minutes
Yes.
that unless someone wants to read this full into the minutes, and it's going to be, well, someone should read it, so current of property assessed as commercial, so what is that commercial for? 4.290.
Do you want your name recorded, like, as per today?
Residential
Doesn't matter.
is 1.810.
It should be.
They have the choice.
And then the rural seasonal is 3.2. So who wants to?
I can read it.
Do you,
Yeah, you're the one who made that amendment, so you better read it.
do you read the resolution, so you read the resolution first before you vote?
Pardon? Well, this is the resolution that we will be voting on.
Be it resolved that the council of the town of Middleton estimates that the sum required for the lawful purpose of the town for the year 2022-2023, after crediting profitable revenues from all sources other than the rates for the year to the sum of $4,450,793, and further be resolved that the town council hereby authorizes the levying and the collection of the rate of the current 4.290 per 100 on the value of the property assessed in the assessment roll as commercial property and the business occupancy, and 1.810 per 100 on the value of the property assessed in the assessment roll as residential resource property, the rate of 3.14 per acre for property assessed in the assessment roll as farm acreage, and the rate of 3.214 per 100 in the value of the property assessed in the assessment roll.
Did I write 3.218, sorry.
3.218, my correction, per 100 on the value of the property assessed in the assessment roll as seasonal tourist businesses, the sewer service charge of a flat rate fee of $250 plus an additional rate of 0.21 per 100 on the value of the property assessed in the assessment roll as taxable residential and commercial property on which any building is connected to the sewage system in the town, and the fire protection rate of 0.16 per $100 on the value of the property assessed in the assessment roll, these being the rates the council deems sufficient to raise the sum to defray the expenditures of the town for the current year, and further be it resolved that the rates and the taxes be due and payable on the last day of September 2022, and further be it resolved that the interest rate of 24% annum compounded be charged on the 2022-2023 final tax bills still outstanding after the last business day of September 2022, and further be resolved that a sewer usage rate of 1.023 per 1 cubic meter of water consumed by tax-exempt properties which are not paying full grants in lieu of taxation be levied in the accordance of the sewer surcharge bylaw for the year 2020, 2022, 2023.
That's,
Okay, so we need a seconder for that resolution. We need a seconder for that resolution.
I'll second this.
Moved and seconded. Are you ready for the question? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carried with one nay vote recorded. Next item, the draft water budget.
So version 1 of Middleton's operating budget was presented for council's consideration on March 7th, 2022. As we have received more accurate information for several budget items, we've included the amendments in version 2 of the water operating budget, and the estimated transfer to reserves is $88,000.
Okay, so we need a motion then to approve that budget. Do we have a mover?
Move that the town of Middleton water utility operating budgets for the years 2022-23, 2023-24, and 24-25 be planned expenditure amounts of $813,679, $813,679, and $813,679, respectively, and projecting no annual surplus or defects be approved.
Deficits.
Deficits be approved.
Do we have a seconder?
A second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on that motion. Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Motion carried. The next is the draft capital investment plan.
Version 1 of Middleton's 5-year capital investment plan was presented for council's consideration on February 22nd. The plan reflects the needs within the community while representing council's strategic priorities, both with a focus on long-term stability for Middleton. So really the only change that we're seeing from the previous draft that was presented is the number we have in there for the Brooklyn Road extension. Initially, we had included that at 250. However, as we'll see, the tender came in at a cost of 300,000. So we have amended that and the funding sources accordingly. So the budget is now presented for your consideration.
Okay, so we need a motion for that one.
I'll move the council approve the 5-year town general capital budget for the years 22, 23, 23, 24, 24, 25, 25, 26, and 2026, 27 in the amount of $6,524,404.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on that motion.
One question I've got about the 2023-24 capital expenditure is website redesign. It's pegged at $35,000. That sounds like an awful lot of money for a website redesign. Is that based on quotes or estimates received?
I based it on what the town of Wolfville recently awarded theirs for. We are hoping that through accessibility grants, we might be able to find some offsetting funding for that. And that may be high, but we will look at the number next year when it becomes time to approve that budget and get more firm numbers.
I look at the websites of municipality of Kings County, for example, town of Berwick, municipality of the county of Annapolis, the templates, and they're all great websites, and no affront to the present website design, or designer, but those are fairly standard templates. I would think with something of that nature in place that it's a matter of taking that template, buying that template, whatever, and then plugging in applicable data for the town, data and files and so on for the town.
I don't think it's that easy. I don't know if Andy has a comment on that.
Tough to comment, I wasn't aware of it. I didn't see that amount. I know the templating issue, or the templating process right now that some of the municipalities are using is not ideal. It's not, the templates it's just putting lipstick on the, you know what. The core is what is important. And I've found that the core that's being used for that municipal project, in my honest opinion, is not sufficient. If you were to go to that kind of core programming, you could still do that and spend your money on the lipstick, right? But I don't think the core program that exists in some other municipalities is sufficient any longer. I can't speak to the other end of the spectrum about the price on a brand new one.
And to be fair, we haven't looked through the tender that Wolfville put out. I just looked at recent websites that were awarded and got that price for the sake of getting version 2 out. So we would need to go through that tender and identify what's in it that we would or would not be looking to award as well. And now bringing Andy into this was sort of a 12 o'clock, let's make sure this is in here so we don't forget it type of thing. And we will fine-tune the cost and the scope of work prior to next year.
Okay, further discussion. So we have a motion before us that needs to be voted on. All those in favor? Aye. Contrary-minded? Motion carried. And our next item is...
So that one, I believe, is just for the
5-year term.
general, and now we need one for the capital water utility.
Okay, so what are your wishes, the capital?
So
I move the council approve the 5-year capital budget for the town water utility for the years 2023, 23-24, 24-25, 25-26, and 26-27 in the amount of $5,735,507.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on that motion. Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Motion carried. The next item is the Environmental Vision Advisory Committee appointment to Annapolis Royal. And Jen, you have a comment on that one?
Yes, so as Mayor Boyer mentioned this morning, we did back in September, I believe, or December. We did support the Town of Annapolis Royal's application for a climate change intern, and they have hired that intern, Kyla Windsor, and she's working with the Town of Annapolis Royal's Environment Advisory Committee, and they've reached out to ourselves and the County of Annapolis to have representatives on their committee to keep up to date on the work that the climate change intern is doing. The advisory committee meets the fourth Wednesday of every month at 2 p.m. and I will mention that they are going to pass a virtual attendance policy, so the member of council who is appointed would, when necessary, would be able to attend virtually if they so choose to do. I was going to reach out to Deputy Mayor Smith, but did not get a chance to see if she would be interested before tonight to see if there was any interest there, but I don't have a response on that. But there may be others around the table.
Okay.
Just thought, since she wasn't going to be here, I would find out if she was interested.
Is there someone here that's interested in maybe filling that vacancy? Is it something that has to be done before she gets back next meeting?
Will she probably issue that by next Wednesday?
She's on her way, yeah.
We could appoint her, and then if she's not willing, then we could change it at the next meeting.
Okay.
I'll move the council appoint Deputy Mayor Gail Smith as a member of the Annapolis Royal Environment Advisory Committee.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded.
I'll wear that one.
Discussion on the motion. We can say that because she'll be off the Valley Waste, that this is her reward.
Still pertain to the environment, Your Worship.
We don't know what her punishment might have been, but this is her reward.
We thought that that might be a good fit where that was coming to an end.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Motion carried.
And the moral of the story is don't dare miss a council meeting.
Okay. Now,
Oh, my.
where are we now?
Brooklyn Road.
Brooklyn Road Water Extension Tender Award.
So in your package, there is a RFD talking about the process that we went through for the extension of the water line to the Atlantic Poultry property, which is outside of the town, but is serviced or can be serviced by Town of Middleton Water Utility. We originally had thought that the budget for this may come in around $200,000. After the tendering process, after the tendering process, you will note that there was a lower bid, but due to them providing that information on the wrong tender form after they were provided with the correct information, and there's receipt of that correct information tender form, our solicitor did recommend that it should be void and therefore was rejected. So the next lowest tender, meeting all conditions, was Howard Little for $308,000 to complete the extension. It has been approved just moments ago in the actual capital budget, so this would just be to actually award the tender to Howard Little so they can begin work. We have, our understanding is that the work would be done by the end of October, and from early discussions with Atlantic Poultry, their hope is to be, that will meet their timelines because they're looking at closer to the end of the calendar year before they're ready.
Okay, so it's just a matter of saying that this is to whom the tender would be awarded.
That's correct.
I move the council award tender 211041-00 Brooklyn Road Water Main Extension to Howard Little Contracting for $308,323.03 plus HST.
We have a seconder for that motion.
I'll second.
Seconded. Discussion on the motion? Hearing none?
Was
All-
the,
Okay.
was the lowest, the provider of the lowest tender informed of the reasons why theirs was rejected?
Yes, they have been informed.
Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Contrary-minded? Motion carried. And then next is the Tidal Power Pilot Project.
So this is a follow-up to the presentation that we had earlier this evening, and they're accompanied this presentation by a funding request letter from the town of Annapolis Royal, which is included in your agenda package. And they are looking for up to, and I say up to because there's the potential for it to be lower if they have more municipal partners. But if we are the only municipal partner, then it would require $22,300 spread over 2 fiscal years to fund the pilot project. So because the budget has been approved, this would be another 11,000 out of operating reserves, and then the other half we would build into next year's budget as an expense.
Okay.
But this potentially has a return.
Yes. Staff's feeling is that it does seem, it's not a minimal amount, but the level of risk on 22,000 is small for the potential payoff that this project could have for providing a steady revenue stream for the town of Middleton.
But really, for this fiscal year, it's only $11,150, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, because next year will be the other half.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah.
And I agree that I think we need, sorry, Gary.
No, go ahead.
That we need to start thinking when we talk about the future, and we talk about how we're going to increase revenues opposed to, continued tax increases. I think that we have to, I mean, this is a minor investment in, with bigger gains, so I think the risks are small, so. Sorry, Gary.
No, that's all. It's just, no, go ahead now.
Gary's good.
I move the council approve funding of up to $22,300 and become a municipal partner in the small-scale community tidal power pilot project being led by the town of Annapolis Royal.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on that motion. Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Reminded? Motion carried. Reports. Management.
I don't really have anything to add other than we have begun interviews for labor and water treatment, and hope to have offers out by the end of this week. And the competition for the Director of Public Works closes on Friday.
Has there been many applicants for that one?
Hoping that more come in this week.
Okay.
Okay. Accessibility Advisory Committee.
Sharon asked me just because Councillor Farren wasn't able to attend the last meeting. So we met on March 8th. We received a verbal update on the needs assessment survey, which I hope that staff at a future meeting will provide a summary and presentation to council, because there was a lot of really great information that was received through that, as well as a youth survey at Middleton Regional High School. And I believe, Andy, was it about 80?
85 at the school.
Yeah, just on a survey that was provided, hard copy. We didn't have the opportunity to go in and actually talk to them and present it. So it's really great. And what were do you remember off the top of your head the numbers on the needs assessment?
Overall, the online and in person was about 203.
So great feedback and a lot of good information that we'll have staff present to council in the future. We reviewed the final accessibility plan for the town that will be presented to council on April 19th. You'll be provided the report well in advance, but we want to review the presentation at the April 12th meeting before presenting to council. The deadline for those reports to be submitted to the province, I will note, is March 31st, but they're not penalizing municipalities for going past that date, and we felt that to make sure that the best product was put forward, that we required the extra month to bring forward that report to council. There was a working group struck to plan some National Accessibility Awareness Week events, and there was a review of the design of the Community Center Fire Hall for accessibility feedback, which was passed on to the Community Center Fire Hall Committee. And the next meeting date is April 12th.
Community Center and Fire Hall Committee, and I think there is a meeting on Wednesday, I believe, of this week. Valley.
Yeah, I just saw Sharon's email before I departed for here, but the Community Center and Fire Hall Committee did meet on March the 9th, and we do continue to meet, I think, every couple of weeks, and I think that may change because things are, well, I guess we don't really necessarily need to meet the actual committee itself. There's a committee, I don't usually like to use the term subcommittee, but made up of the group, the design component. I'm not sure what we call that.
We were appointed to the to work with the design team.
Well, okay. The design team had taken place and shared revised design, a few minor changes. Recommendation is for possibly 2 phases, and efficiency rebates are available, but not in significant amounts, so that was kind of visited. As Jen just mentioned, staff met with the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and both made recommendations to increase accessibility, which have been passed on to the design team. And currently, as far as fundraising goes, there's an amount of $583,954 left to be raised prior to any tender being awarded. And the next meeting, as the mayor just mentioned, is actually Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock.
Okay. Next, then, Valley Waste Resource.
So it is in the agenda package, and I do just want to highlight that the board did approve the operating capital budget, so we'll bring that to the next committee of council, committee of the whole meeting. The budget includes a $500,000 municipal contribution to a vehicle and equipment reserve fund, and this is a request that's in addition to the municipal party's regular contribution, and the thought is that a portion of the surplus that we will receive, so they just gave not permission, approved at the last board meeting to release the surplus from 2020-21, which was about $25,000 for the town of Middleton. So if they're looking for $500,000, our portion would be about half of that. So we should see an additional $12.5 which is kind of what we just accrued for the title, to go back into our surplus, or operating reserve once we receive that money from Valley Waste.
Okay. Nothing further than correspondence.
Your report?
Okay. Mayor's report, well, there it is, they've seen it. We're getting late.
Okay.
Correspondence, Hilton and Margie Seymour, tabled. Anything by members? Councillor Marshall,
Nothing, Your Worship.
Councillor Bartlett,
Nothing, sir.
Councillor Knapp,
Nothing, Your Worship.
Councillor Farren,
Nothing, Your Worship.
and I have nothing to add other than we now need a motion to adjourn to
In camera.
camera.
So move.
Seconded.
Seconded. Lisa,
Yeah.
need to go?
Yes.
To the block.
She's not staying. She's not staying.
Yeah, I can't wait to
No, but I mean, does she knows though.
No, the next year.
Everyone but Andy, but that's just because I didn't see him today. Yes, we can stop.